Hello, I'm your host, Jess Magnan, and if you don't already know me, I am a spiritual mindset coach, which means that what I do basically is I take spiritual wisdom, universal laws, what I know to be the purest information available to us. And when I say to us, I mean all of us. We all have access to this information. But what I do is I translate it into a language that your subconscious mind can understand, accept, and integrate into your life so that you can benefit from that information. So, what I see often and where I spent many years was in a place of essentially having a tug of war going on, or a discord, a disagreement going on between my subconscious mind and my spiritual self or my highest self. So I use a mixed bag of tools at this point. I use hypnosis, neuroscience, intuition, somatic tools, energy work, breath work, meditation, and I use all of this to bring down, sort of download the untapped power of spirituality into the human experience. I'm obsessed. And I've tested all of this on myself. And so I wanted to start this podcast as a way of sharing how I got here, the steps that I took to get here, which are just as important as the tools and the ideas that I'm using now, right? It's always a progression and it's ongoing. So I wanted to start with the kind of foundational ideas and understandings and make those available here because quite literally these perspectives, these tools, these practices have changed my life across every area of life. And I want to share them with you. So, what I wanted to actually talk about today is not the very beginning, but one of the most pivotal upgrades that I received when it comes to understanding myself as a spiritual being having a human experience. And what I'm talking about is the subconscious mind. For a lot of years, I was a spiritual seeker. I was into metaphysics. I was a yoga teacher. I was a meditation teacher. I was reading all the books and consuming all of the latest, greatest information in the world of like law of attraction, manifesting, all of these things. And I was always there a little bit before these things became trendy. And I always knew like I'm supposed to be here and into this stuff. And I had a real honeymoon phase with these ideas and these concepts where I manifested a lot. I was having a ball and it was a beautiful, beautiful time that unexpectedly came to a halt for me, where I started to become a little bit disillusioned with the idea of these different tools for manifesting. And you guys remember the book The Secret, and like positive affirmations and visualization and all of this stuff, which worked really well for me in some areas. And what was starting to become really obvious is that in other areas it just wasn't working, or like it had worked for a little bit and then all of a sudden it stopped working. So I was feeling really like as I said, disillusioned or kind of torn. Like, do I believe in this stuff or do I not believe in this stuff? Like, what is going on here? What is missing? And eventually, because I'm so stubborn, and once I've got a question in my mind, I need to get it answered. I eventually stumbled into, and really it wasn't stumbling, it was all divinely ordered, I'm sure, but I stumbled into the world of subconscious reprogramming, let's say, or even hypnosis. I had been following, you might know her, Catherine Zinkina, who went by the handle of Manifestation Babe, and she had been talking about someone who she had received some treatment or sessions with, for lack of a better word, in the modality of RRT, or rapid resolution therapy. And what she did actually was she had posted a session that she had with this therapist or facilitator. And I remember distinctly listening to this podcast where she was receiving a an RRT session, and I felt different afterward. I felt lighter. I felt more free. I felt like more was possible. My mind was just working differently. And this was in a matter of about, I think it was maybe an hour, maybe a little more than an hour. So naturally, I was on my way to getting my certification in RRT. So I ended up doing two separate trainings, pretty much back to back, and getting the skills that I needed to start facilitating using RRT. So much like hypnosis, we would always joke that it's hypnosis but better, or I would say often hypnosis on steroids. And this was the tool that not just in my own personal journey, but in my journey as a coach and getting results for my clients, this was the tool that literally, like, it was a quantum leap. Let's just say that. I was getting more results, better results, faster with all of my clients, but also in my own life. And so what I want to share with you today are some of the myths from the healing world that this understanding of the subconscious mind allowed me to debunk, essentially, and how that basically allowed me to jump timelines, if you want, or just saved me years of, whether it would have been therapy or just struggling, settling, um, kind of living in that place of trying to get there, but not knowing if I was even going in the right direction. Like, this was a major hack and a major fast track that got me out of what I call the healing loop. So if you're here listening, you might know what I'm talking about. It's like this endless loop of healing. Now, I will say this right away. I don't think we're ever finished changing, evolving, growing, but I think what RRT did for me and my understanding of the subconscious mind did for me was to reconfigure my perception such that instead of coming at it with the like preconceived idea that I was fixing something that was broken. Now, the way I approach all obstacles, challenges, conflict, drama, trauma, whatever, is that I assume, I know, I don't have to work at it. I just know that when these things happen, embedded within them are assignments that are specifically designed for me and showing up at the perfect moment for me to be able to extract the wisdom. So, a little bit of a different topic, but essentially, um, all that happens to us, you might have heard me say this before, is actually happening for us. So, this is something that I wouldn't have been able to recognize or explain even probably 10 years ago. It would have been a stretch for me to fully grasp this idea and believe it, but now I'm 100% of the way there. So I want to give you more of the foundational understandings that I believe needed to be in place for me to fully accept this idea that essentially I'm not a victim. So it's a good little segue. The first myth that I want to debunk with you for you is that guilt is useful or necessary or valuable. So I grew up, and I'm thinking a lot of you did as well, seeing guilt used as either a weapon or at the very least a tool, but more than that, guilt being something that is woven into the fabric of how we see not just one another, but ourselves. And from the subconscious mind or our RT perspective, what we say all the time, what we believe, is that guilt is actually worse than useless. Why? Glad you asked. Because when the subconscious mind is perceiving that something shouldn't have happened, right? Because if you think about guilt, it's feeling as though, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. Or if you're making someone feel guilty, you shouldn't have done that. So, when from the perspective of the subconscious mind, there is a belief that something shouldn't have happened, what's actually going on? Because, and here's another little gem for you, because the subconscious mind does not differentiate between past and future, if you're thinking about something, whether it had happened in the past or it might happen in the future or it's happening right now, your subconscious mind actually can't distinguish. So it simply reads everything incoming as now. So what that means in terms of the effect is that if my subconscious mind is taking something in, so I could be thinking about it with my conscious mind, and my subconscious mind is reading the information, and the perception is that shouldn't have happened. What my subconscious mind will then begin attempting to do is to make the thing not have happened. Let's say it's something in the past. That shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have done that to me. Well, now my subconscious mind is actually perceiving that there is something to do about making the thing that already had happened not have happened from right now. So tell me, logically speaking, how useful is that? Because what it is it's energy, right? Unconscious mind is sending energy in the form of your attention, your thoughts, back onto something that no longer exists and is attempting to rewrite it. How useful is that? Am I right? And so it applies to future things as well, in the sense that, of course, yes, there is a place for, okay, if something happened and I made a mistake, I don't want to repeat that mistake. Sure, fine. But what often happens is the subconscious mind becomes kind of like obsessed or overly vigilant about preventing the thing in the future, to the extent that, and you've probably experienced this or witnessed it at least, you actually end up manifesting exactly that thing because of the fixation on it, the hyper fixation on it. So it's kind of like either way, you lose, right? So guilt, I want to talk about it a little bit differently here, just to really get the pegs in the ground for you. When we think about something that has happened, what we want to recognize, what is useful to recognize, is that if something had happened, something has happened, it's past tense, there had to have been a cause. The thing that happened was the effect. And so we know, because cause and effect, if there was an effect, there had to be a cause. And if there was a cause, what we can assume is that that thing couldn't have not happened because there was a cause, right? And I want to break this down a little bit more. So think about a storm. Think about a really bad storm that blows over a shed, and the shed lands on a flower, a beautiful flower that you had been cultivating in your garden, whatever. I'm just making this up as we go. But after the storm takes place, the mind might be thinking, this shouldn't have happened. But we know, if we really break it down, that because of the temperature, the barometric pressure, the wind speed, the placement of the shed, the place where you planted the flower, all of these different, we could call them ingredients or conditions, dovetailing together, that effect of shed falling on flower at the moment that it did couldn't have not happened, right? So what is really useful for the subconscious mind is to think about everything in this way. So nothing that happened could have not happened, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. So to think that it shouldn't have happened, it doesn't really make sense, because if it could have happened differently, then it would have happened differently. But since it couldn't have happened differently, to think that it shouldn't have happened differently makes no sense. Because what we're doing is we're looking at things through the lens of cause and effect. If it could have been different, it would have. If he could have been the one to be able to carry out the relationship, he would have, right? My mentor used to talk a lot about expectation, and he would use an analogy about a person in a wheelchair, and how ridiculous it would be if we would go up to that person in the wheelchair and ask them to grab something off the top shelf of, up above the fridge for you. It doesn't make sense. And often what we're doing is we are putting unrealistic expectations as an overlay onto things that we think should happen. And it's extremely damaging to us. It might not be that we can visually see the inability or the impossibility of something that we think should have happened or shouldn't have happened, but now that you've thought about it through this lens, you see how damaging and how wasteful thinking about things any other way than perfect acceptance or perfect understanding is the way that I like to put it. So like just assuming that if this thing happened, it couldn't have not happened. And then it sort of stops the guilt or the blaming in its tracks. Okay, so that's number one. And I remember for me when this clicked in, it was lucky for me that I had already had a good amount of spiritual uh, kind of like rewiring around the idea of guilt and innocence, and how essentially now the way that I would talk about it, everything is in balance. Everything is already fair or in fair exchange, so to speak. So even, the worst thing ever that happened to you, there are an equal number of positives that came out of it. And this way of looking at things is really the source way of looking at things, is seeing things in perfect balance. So when RRT came into my life, it was a little bit familiar in the sense that I was like, oh, wait a second. I've heard this idea before. And I realized that, well, I had heard the idea, and my conscious mind, which only constitutes, sadly, 5% of my conscious mind loved this idea, but my unconscious mind wasn't on board until RRT. And after that, because I was no longer myself using guilt as a weapon or a tool, a sneaky tool to get what I wanted, which I definitely realized I had been doing way more than I am proud to admit. But I think we all come by it so honestly. But when I stopped doing that, and I stopped, or let me say that differently. When I stopped doing that, I also stopped beating myself up and making myself feel guilty. And let me tell you, the night and day difference in energy flow, in confidence, in clarity, in audacity, in what's the word I'm looking for? Like just willingness to entertain the best case scenario when guilt is no longer a player in the game. So take that with you. Let it sink in, let it absorb. Guilt is not useful. Now, I'll just say one last thing before we move on to number two. I'm not looking to deem any emotion or any feeling, any response as wrong or bad. But what I had been doing and what I see people doing constantly is essentially like setting up camp. Well, this person's guilty, it's their fault, or I can never come back from this mistake. And that's like a one rung on the ladder. You're not supposed to live on that rung. Okay, so it's not to say that it's wrong, it's bad, you shouldn't feel it, but that it's literally a stepping stone, a place to get you from A to B. So let's move on to myth number two, because I feel like I could get carried away here if I wanted to. And they're all interconnected, but the next myth, and we hear this one a lot, is you just need to let it go, or that letting go is the answer, right? How often have you heard that? And how annoying is it when you're upset and someone says you really need to let that go? So the way that we think about hanging on and letting go in the RRT world is incredibly refreshing. I love it. The first time I heard this, I was like, oh my God, thank you. So we don't actually think that you are choosing to or consciously holding on, but rather that your subconscious mind is perceiving that essentially something is still happening. So remember what I talked about with subconscious not understanding the difference between past, present, and future? Well, that's what I'm referring to here. So if you're, let's say, like just in the language that I just mentioned, hanging on to something, someone would accuse you of like, you really got to let that go. What we believe is actually going on is that it's sort of like a print, like a handprint in the sand. And the print is on your subconscious mind. Stay with me here. And the print that's been left in the sand of your subconscious is being perceived by your subconscious as the event itself. I'll let that sink in. No pun intended. So until the print is washed away, subconscious mind is going to be perceiving that this event either just happened, is happening, or is about to happen. So it's this kind of loop or open tab in the background that's just eating up all kinds of energy or memory or resources, however you want to think about it. So in manifesting, in the world of manifesting, we know that visualizing can be like a really powerful practice, and I'm all for it. But sometimes what happens is, and I hear a lot of people say this, it feels hard or even impossible to see the future. I'll instruct people in workshops and homework assignments to paint a picture of the future. And I hear this often where people say, well, I can't see anything. And a big part of the reason why is because what happens at the level of unconscious mind when there is a print that is sort of like stuck is that it's almost like when you zoom in on a picture and the pixels get enlarged, right? That's essentially what goes on inside of unconscious mind when there's an event. We could call it a trauma. It could be a little t or a big T trauma, something really, really, really upsetting, or something minor like a fender bender. These all fall under the umbrella of trauma. But what can happen is that when the pixels get enlarged at the level of unconscious mind, it sort of blocks out the perception of anything that would come after. It's almost as though the future ceases to exist. And it makes sense if you think about it through the lens of, let's say, like a hostage situation. You're at work and all of a sudden it becomes a hostage situation, like on the movies, right? And what happens when you're in that situation is that the future, in essence, does go away, right? You're not thinking about the haircut that you're going to get tomorrow or what you're going to cook for dinner because survival becomes imminent. And so this is often why we can't visualize the future, and we also can't let go of the thing because the print is still there, which means at the level of your inner mind, the event is still happening, just happened, or about to happen. So where do I want to go from here? This line, this connects with this line that I heard many years ago, probably close to 10 years ago, around when someone becomes emotionally stunted. when someone ceases to emotionally mature, it is usually because they had experienced a trauma at a particular age, and because of the level of impact of this trauma on the subconscious mind, the emotional evolution or growth, it stalls right in that place. Because, again, of this issue with reading time that the subconscious uh, doesn't have the capacity for. So it's like there are there is there are two competing realities happening at once. And as you know, subconscious mind accounts for 95% of mind. So if there is a subconscious tab open running this event in the background, it's going to win the tug of war against the best efforts of your conscious mind. So, in order to then stop living in that stunted or victim centric place, what needs to happen is subconscious mind actually needs to receive evidence. It's kind of like building a case. So you've got to convince the jury, right? You need sufficient evidence for two things. And I want you to listen carefully here, because this is probably not where your mind would go. Your subconscious mind needs to receive sufficient evidence to prove that, one, the event is no longer happening. So that one will make sense. But two, that you didn't die in the event. I know that sounds very dramatic, but that is how your subconscious mind functions. It doesn't function on logic. Its number one job is to keep you alive. And so everything incoming is either going to fall into the bucket or the category of threat to survival or not threat to survival. So anytime we experience trauma, which is anything that we are not prepared for, that's why we have like a spectrum, right? Your subconscious mind essentially perceives a threat to survival. So this is why things like mantras or affirmations don't work. And if they do work, it takes forever, because what's going on is that conscious mind will be able to logically grasp that there is no danger, but subconscious mind, it reads everything in a very black and white way. If it is unexpected and we are unprepared, even if it's like a surprise meeting, right? Have you ever gone into fight or flight because you had to all of a sudden speak in front of a group and you weren't prepared, that sort of thing? You can probably think of your own version of that story. So subconscious mind is sort of reading anything that is out of the realm of like what's routine and what is familiar as a threat to survival. So it's a very rudimentary system. It's a very kind of primitive system, which works really well in situations where there's actual danger, and in situations where there isn't, it can cause a lot of problems. It's kind of like having a car alarm that is overly sensitive, and it's going off at all the wrong times, and it's really starting to become annoying. So we need to get a different type of information through to the unconscious mind in order to have it participate and cooperate in the intentions and goals that you set with your conscious mind. So I want to use that to segue into the final myth that I want to debunk for you, and it is this phrase that you've probably heard before, that you have to feel it to heal it. So it connects with what I've already been saying, but it's essentially it's incorrect for the reason that if every time I reopen the can of worms, the story, the traumatic story, or the story where I'm laying blame or pointing my finger at the culprit for whatever it is, whatever I'm rehashing in therapy, essentially my subconscious mind, as you now know, can't tell the difference between me telling the story and the thing actually happening. So I might as well be right back there in that traumatic period or experience, reliving the thing. So instead of clearing away the handprint, I'm pressing on it. It's like pressing on a wound, right? And the tab keeps it stays open in the background. And for me, I had done enough therapy to start to get this hunch that it wasn't working, that I wasn't really getting better. It almost felt like the further out I would get from a session with my therapist, the better I would start to feel. And then I would show up for my scheduled session, I'd be leaving the session, and then I'd be feeling like shit again. So what RRT did for me was essentially update the software program. That's how we often refer to the subconscious mind in the world of RRT. To get the memo through, a few memos, right? Now that we've gone through all three, that guilt has no value. And therefore, that emotional state would not be necessary. And what's cool about subconscious work is when you've effectively gotten the memo through to your subconscious mind, you don't have to consciously work at these things, which makes sense when you think about it, right? Unconscious processes are those that are kind of taken off your plate in a sense, right? I don't have to think about my heart beating. I don't have to think about my lungs breathing, my food digesting. And so when we can get the language, the translation just right, we can take these things off of our plate. So it's not this feeling of like pushing a boulder up a hill and trying to heal ourselves, but rather getting it's like a bug fix when you get a software update for your phone, right? Everything just works better, and there's less to think about. There's less to try to like manage and control, and it's less effort. It's a great time. So where was I going with that? So yeah, once those updates had been installed, there was a lot of energy that had been tied up in these loops, right? These processes that were not useful, that I got back. So I got my mojo back, so to speak. My hormones started to balance out. I was more creative. I was in better shape. And all of this because my subconscious mind was no longer running these fear-based or fight or flight programs that were based on things that were no longer happening, or in some cases things that hadn't yet happened. So from a spiritual perspective, what I got was presence. And I do want to talk more about the connection between subconscious mind and spirit or intuition that's going to be ongoing. But for now, I just want to leave you with these three opportunities to kind of quantum leap or timeline jump. Even just to know, to hear that guilt is not useful. That's like a seed. We've planted a seed in your subconscious, and you're not going to be able to unknow that. You're off the hook when it comes to letting go. I know that if you could have let it go by now, you would have. So instead of guilting yourself about not being able to let it go, realizing that what actually needs to happen in order to get beyond this thing is simply to get the memo through to subconscious mind. And there are very specific ways to do that. Remember, we don't use logic, we use a very different language. You can imagine that right now you and I are speaking Russian and your subconscious mind speaks Mandarin. So it's just a translation issue. And then finally, with this feel it to heal it, if you are in a pattern, a process, a modality that you have this sense is making things worse, or at least like not a perfect process, something that feels kind of like a one step forward, two steps back, know that that's your intuition coming through. And well, again, we're not looking to make any emotional response or any feelings unacceptable or wrong. There's not some like long-winded, endless, arduous process of just feeling it over and over again. It's not like you have to feel it so much in order to release it. It's simpler than that. And again, there's a very specific language and process that once understood by the subconscious, the thing becomes the event, the thing that you've been trying to heal, or the thing that you've been hanging on to. It's kind of like putting something into an archive. The information is there, but the emotional charge is gone, is neutralized. And we can do this for guilt, shame, resentment, blame, fear, anger, all of the troubling emotions that we typically spend years in therapy trying to process. We can actually clear and move through in a matter of, oftentimes, I'm not even kidding you, hours with these tools. So a lot of food for thought. I know I'm going to close it off there for now. And if this resonated and you want to ask a question, I always, always, always love hearing your questions. There will be a link in the show notes to subscribe to my newsletter. Once you get the welcome email for the newsletter, feel free to hit reply and ask me a question or two, and I will answer you directly. And thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you soon.